All right, greetings, friends. As far as I'm concerned, there are three kinds of books in the world. There are books to be read, there are books to be reread, and then there are books to be read again and again and referenced throughout the rest of your life. The book that I'm going to discuss today is one of the latter. Amazingly, I sensed that the moment that I opened the book. To be perfectly honest, I felt a sense of reverence when I opened the book. And I still feel a sense of reverence for this book. And it feels kind of silly for me to say that. In a lot of my videos, I know that I talk about these serious topics, sometimes with kind of a smirk on my face, sometimes outright humor. Part of that is because I have entertained these pursuits and these interests through varying levels of intensity throughout my entire life. But it's only been relatively recently that I've been talking about them at all, much less broadcasting myself on YouTube. So there's a level of self-consciousness there, and I don't deny that. I think most of the people in my world, both in my professional life and in my personal life, would find the things that I talk about absurd, and I'm perfectly aware of that. So there's a level of self-consciousness there. There's also, the old saying, taking the piss out of them. Like, I don't really like to project or take myself too seriously. I think it's something that I've noticed from a lot of people who have been in combat. A lot of veterans are like that. It's just something I don't know. It becomes kind of hard to take yourself too seriously. So don't let that degrade how serious I am when I say that. I feel a sense of reverence when I read this book and when I discuss this book. And the book that I'm talking about is Meditations on the Tarot, Letters to Unknown Friend, A Journey into Christian Hermeticism. Now, before I go on, let me say that to say that this book is not like your normal book on tarot is a euphemism. It's the level of depth that the book takes the subject is something I've never encountered before. It's a challenging read because of that. And I'm going to read some of the book to you, or for you, so that you can see what I mean. Because I want everybody out there to get a really good sense of what this is. Because let's face it, there's tons of tarot books out there, which is awesome. I'm not saying anything negative about that. I love the tarot. I've always been fascinated by it. But this book is very different from using tarot cards to divine whether or not your high school crush has a crush back on you. Right? And there's nothing wrong with those things. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying this is something way deeper than that. The book was originally published in French in 1967. In 1985, it was published in English. Did you know in France they have a really long tradition of great alchemical, hermetic philosophers and thinkers. And so the book's been floating around since then. The book was published anonymously, but it's understood that the author was a guy named Valentine Tomberg. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Tomberg, he himself is a really interesting character. There were people in his era who thought his next incarnation was going to be the last Buddha, which is a whole thing in itself. But he is a Christian mystic and just a very deep philosophical thinker, just a spiritual figurehead. And he is a study in himself. I would definitely recommend looking the man up. It's a fascinating thing. But to keep this brief and mostly to honor the fact that he chose to publish this anonymously, right? He wanted to keep himself out of it, so let's keep him out of it. Let's just stick to the book. It's kind of how I see it. And so that's the story of the book. The book was written anonymously as letters to unknown friends, right? So they're all kind of written as a letter, and they're all based around one of the tarot cards. But like I said, I'm going to read it because it's the only way for me to really get across what I'm trying to say. So basically, in this book, the tarot is presented as a lineal progression of spiritual enlightenment, of spiritual initiation. that tells a continual story, with each card giving the opportunity for a contemplation on really deep and profound aspects of spiritual reality. And let me also, I just also want to put out there, like I said, I absolutely expect to be returning to this book repeatedly. I am still need to grasp a lot of what is in this book. It's just important for me to say that, because throughout the time I've started this channel, I've just always tried to be clear. Like, I sure as hell am not a guru. I'm not even an expert. I'm just somebody who's trying to understand these things, and really, really wants to understand these things. And it's important. I feel it's important to say that now, because it's a very difficult book. I mean, it's a technically, intellectually difficult book. It's a challenging read, and I like challenging reads. I read textbooks and I don't find them dry. Like, I hear people talk about, oh, the writing is so dry. I really don't even know what dry writing is. If the information is interesting, it's interesting to me. But this book was still challenging, and I still am going to have to return to it and spend a lot of time with it, which is part of what makes it so worthwhile, right? It's like those hard reads are the ones that are so worth it, man. Those are the ones that when you're done with them, you feel like you've grown, like in here, like in your spirit has grown. And this is going to be one of those books that I'll be wrestling with for a while, gratefully wrestling with. And so, like I said, I think I mentioned earlier, I'm going to read a short passage from the book, because I think it's the only way to really convey what I mean when I say that the book is on a level of depth that is beyond any other book you're going to find on tarot, or at least any other book that I'm aware of. Actually, that's maybe not entirely true, because I have the book on the tarot by Mauni Sati, I think is the name. And that's also a very technical and challenging book. But anyway, this book is... let me read the passage, right? So the passage that I want to read is from early in the book. It's from the first letter is regarding the magician, the tarot card of the magician. And I'm going to read a couple pages, and this should give you a good idea for what I mean by the level of depth that's in this book. But it was in reading this, the first letter of the magician, that I was, I laid there afterwards. Like I said, it was a difficult read, a challenging read, not a difficult read. So I had to read a lot of the passages multiple times to even come close to grasping what he was meant, and I'm still going to need to go back to it. I mean, it's one of those books. And I just laid there, just feeling like a veil had been lifted, right? Nowhere close to enlightenment, but a little brighter than it had been before, right? Like my understanding had deepened just from reading this. And that's the whole experience of this book. And I expect to be the continued experience as I return to this book and continue to wrestle with it and continue to try to understand it. But, all right. So we are going to be reading a couple pages. And this is not going to be the whole passage of the magician. This is just going to be a couple pages from it. All right. Okay. Now, this is imperfect. It's the way the writing is, like finding a good place to drop into the subject was not easy. But I think this was a pretty good choice. So, it must be concluded, therefore, that the method of analogy, on the one hand, is in no way infallible, but on the other hand, it is qualified to lead to the discovery of essential truths. That's analogy is the word I use, referring to analogy. Its effectiveness and value depend on the fullness and exactitude of the experience upon which it is based. Let us return now to the Arcanum. Am I actually saying that right? I've only ever read it. I don't think I've heard anyone speak it. But let us return now to the Arcanum, the Magician. As concentration without effort finds expression in the whole picture of the card, as well as in all its details, and thus constitutes the practical arcanum here, one also finds expressed in the method of analogy which constitutes the theoretical arcanum. For, seen from the level of the intellect, the practice of the method of analogy corresponds completely to the practice of concentration without effort. Also, it appears there not as work, but rather as play. Now, that last part is actually really important, because a big part of what he says the magician is about, as you're entering this world and understanding these deeper esoteric truths, is he talks about you have to master this ability to have effortless concentration and a childlike attitude to the subject. And when he says childlike, I don't think I'm going to be reading. When he talks about the childlike aspect of being, what he means by that is he says, children play all the time, but they're very serious in their play. And that's kind of the attitude that he is saying you have to approach these subjects with. Effortless concentration and a childlike attitude, but not childlike as in frivolous or distracted. Childlike as in you are playing, but you are playing very seriously, right? All right. So the practice of analogy on the intellectual plane of consciousness does not, in fact, demand any effort. Either one perceives analogous correspondences or one does not perceive or see them. Just as the magician or juggler has had to train and work for a long time before attaining the ability of concentration without effort, similarly, he who makes use of the method of analogy on the intellectual plane must have worked much, i.e., to have acquired long experience and to have accumulated the teachings which it requires, before attaining the faculty of immediate perception of analogous correspondences, before becoming a magician or juggler who makes use of the analogy of beings and of things without effort as in a game. This faculty constitutes an essential part of the realization of the task that the master charged his disciples with. Truly, I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. That's Mark. It's from the book of Mark. The little child does not work, he plays. This was the part. But how serious he is, i.e., concentrated when he plays. His attention is still complete and undivided, whereas with he who approaches the kingdom of God, it becomes again entire and undivided. And this is the arcanum of intellectual geniality, the vision of the unity of beings and things through the immediate perception of their correspondences, through consciousness concentrated without effort. The Master did not want us to become puerile. What he wanted is that we attain the geniality of intelligence and heart which is analogous, not identical, to the attitude of the child, who carries only easy burdens and renders all his yokes light. The magician represents the man who has attained harmony and equilibrium between the spontaneity of the unconscious, in the sense given to it by Carl Jung, and the deliberate action of the conscience, in the sense of I or ego consciousness. His state of consciousness is the synthesis of the conscious and the unconscious, of creative spontaneity and deliberately executed activity. It is the state of consciousness that the psychological school of Carl Jung calls individuation, or synthesis of the conscious and unconscious elements in the personality, or synthesis of the self. It's cool that he references Jung so much in this, because Jung's had quite a comeback over the last couple of years. But this synthesis renders possible concentration without effort and intellectual vision without effort, which are the practical and theoretical aspects of all fruitfulness in both practical and intellectual realms. I'm going to go on just a bit more. So Friedrich Schiller seems to have had consciousness of this arcanum when he advanced his doctrine of the synthesis between intellectual consciousness, imposing heavy burdens of duties and of rules in the instinctive nature of man, in the Spieltrieb, which is the urge to play. The true and the desired must, according to him, find their synthesis in the beautiful, for it is only in the beautiful that the Spieltrieb renders the burden of the true or the just light and raises at the same time the darkness of instinctive forces to the level of light and consciousness. And that was a reference to Schiller's Letters on the Aesthetic Education of Man, published 1967. In other words, or no, the translation that he was referring to was published in 1967. Anyway, in other words, he who sees the beauty of that which he recognizes as true cannot fail to love it. And in loving it, the element of constraint in the duty prescribed by the true will disappear. Duty becomes a delight. It is thus that work is transformed into play and concentration without effort becomes possible. But the first arcanum, the arcanum of practical and theoretical fruitfulness, whilst proclaiming the effectiveness of serious play, which is the complete tarot, contains at the same time a serious warning. There is play with a capital P and play with a lowercase p. There is the magician with a capital M and the magician with a lowercase m. This is why anyone who confuses lack of concentration with concentration without effort and streams of simple mental associations with a vision without effort of correspondences by analogy will necessarily become a charlatan. And there's a whole preceding section where he talks about charlatanism and the danger of becoming a charlatan, which can happen without your intent, without your conscious intent. The arcanum of the magician is twofold. It has two aspects. He invites us on the path which leads to geniality, and he warns us of the danger of the path which leads to charlatanism. I must add that often, too often alas, the teachers of occultism follow the two paths at the same time, and that which they teach contains elements of genius mixed with elements of charlatanism. May the first arcanum of the tarot be always present before us as a kind of guardian of the threshold. Guardian of the threshold, that's Jean Dubuis. He mentions that a lot in his writing. May Mark Stavish as well. May he invite us to cross the threshold of work and effort. The guardian of the threshold is this aspect of your psyche, this like more primal, deeper part of your psyche that can prevent you. It's like terrifying. It's a scary thing. And it prevents you from breaking through into the next level of esoteric understanding. But the thing is, it does so for a purpose. It's there to kind of protect you. Maybe not protect you, because I don't know if that's its motive, but that's its function, right? Because if you try to go too deep, too fast, you can suffer these psychic schisms. And so the guardian of the threshold is this thing inside of us that guards the threshold. All right. May he invite us to cross the threshold of work and effort in order to enter into activity without effort and knowledge without effort. But may he at the same time warn us that the more we go beyond the threshold, the more work, effort, and experience on this side of the threshold will be indispensable for the attainment of real truth. Man. Yeah, all right. May the magician say to us, and may he repeat it each day. To perceive and to know, to try and to be able to are all different things. There are mirages above as there are mirages below. You only know that which is verified by the agreement of all forms of experience in its totality. Experience of the senses, moral experience, psychic experience, the collective experience of other seekers for the truth, and finally the experience of those whose knowing merits the title of wisdom and whose striving has been crowned by the title of saint. Academia and church stipulate methodical and moral conditions for one who desires to progress. Carry them out strictly before and after each flight into the region beyond the domain of work and effort. If you do this, you will be a sage and a mage. If you do not do this, you will only be a charlatan. Now, obviously, like I said, they're difficult ideas. I think the writing is rather eloquent, but some of the wording also maybe is a bit dated. But the biggest thing is I didn't read the whole chapter. I don't know how long that would take. Each chapter is long. It's not really a chapter. It's the letter to an unknown friend, which goes over one of the tarot cards. But I wanted to read that because I wanted to give a sense for what I mean when I say that the depth of the book it's extraordinary, man. It's extraordinary. And it's a book I expect to just return to for the rest of my life. And well, maybe not. Maybe I'll get lucky and I'll fully crack it earlier than that, and I'll be able to put it to rest. But But I don't know. I look forward to just pulling that book off my shelf for a long time and reading through it and finding these pearls of wisdom. So anyway, it almost feels silly to say I recommend the book. Do I recommend the book? Yeah, I recommend the book. It's profound. It's an amazing work. That's really all I can say about it. So I hope some of you out there check it out if it appeals to you. If not, that's cool too. But if it does, yeah, give it a whirl, man. It's a book. So that's about it, friends. Peace out.